necessary. I rise to my destiny.
Mi bomba!
Turbo engine accelerators. Status confirmed. Checking rapid ground controls. Status confirmed. Sequence initialized. 3, 2, 1, 0. Rampage mode activated.
Hey, how's it going everybody? Welcome back to another Borderlands 4 video. Now recently the game received a huge balance patch, got a bunch of nerfs, a bunch of buffs, and a bunch of bug fixes like Groundbreaker and Vex Bleed being broken or things scaling in a way that it was not intended. So now with all those things changed and fixed, I wanted to bring you guys the current best in slot meta builds for each Vault Hunter that we currently have. Now for me to consider a build best in slot, it has to be very good at mobbing, bossing, and it has to require little to no gear changes. For a build to be good at mobbing, it has to have a good amount of survivability and room clear, so good AoE. It also has to be able to deal with badass enemies like elemental eaters or vile enemies, as well as drill site bosses. For a build to be good at bossing, it should be able to kill bosses very quickly or relatively fast in a safe and consistent manner. If a build can do 3 billion damage but it requires 1 billion stars to be aligned and get a lucky crit and everything like that, that for me is not consistent, and it might be better to use a build that kills bosses slightly slower but guaranteed. Now, also, little to no gear swapping. I'm lazy, I don't like swapping gear around, and in my personal opinion, if you have to swap around, 7 different items and like 3 specializations when you're going from mobbing to bossing sections, that's basically 2 different builds that share a skill tree. Now, of course, if you are going to be farming a boss, then you should use a setup that's optimized for bossing, which I will provide for all of these characters. And if you're going to be doing something like drill sites, which is basically just a bunch of mobbing, then you should use something that's optimized for that purpose as well, which I will be providing as well. But, I'm just not a huge fan of swapping a bunch of different things. If you swap around 1 or 2 things, that's okay, but that's about it. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to be going over things a little bit quickly because we have a lot of characters to cover and I don't want the video to be like an hour long. So let's go ahead and start with Harlowe. Now when you play Harlowe, the first thing you have to do is go to the main menu and click on the options button. When you click on options, you're going to want to go into the audio tab, and you can either change the language to Japanese, or you can put this down to 0 so you don't have to hear her bitch ass. Now let's quickly go over the skill tree. So for the red tree, we're going to be picking up Field Ready Prototype, and then Neutron Capture and Bleeding Edge. You do not need the fire rate from Cyclotron. This is, you don't need this fire rate. So in terms of quality of life changes, the Bleeding Edge is the best way to go in this second row, since this is going to help you with mobbing sections, and you don't need this fire rate for bossing. We're also going to pick up 2 elementary and 3 enriched, glow up, 2 points into Poison Sun and 3 into Chain Reactor, and then 1 point into Demon Core, or picking up Demon Core. Then in the green tree, our goal is to get down to Decoherence, so we're going to put 5 points into Momentum, Neutron Decay, and then Resonance Cascade, and I personally put them into Creative Overflow, but you could move this to Confirmative Reality if you wanted to, but I personally don't find it necessary. And then of course, like I said, the 5 points into Decoherence. With your remaining 4 points, the best place to put them is into Make Extraordinary. This is going to give you a lot of crit chance for your Neutron Capture. For your specialization, I am going to recommend you get the best defense, as well as riddle you this. This increase to gun damage will play into your action skill damage by the use of I am a gun, and then finally pick up a hone mine for the extra action skill crit hit chance and action skill crit hit damage. Now going over your gear, my main mobbing weapon is going to be the Lucian's Flank or the Mad Lad. Both of these guns are extremely good. The Mad Lad obviously doesn't have to be reloaded, but you do have to shoot it in bursts so that it does not overheat and go into that lengthy animation. The Lucian's Flank unfortunately does have to be reloaded, but because it's Jacob's, it does ricochet, and we have a lot of crit chance, so we will be ricocheting quite a lot. So I pair that with a Quintain Jacob's enhancement, which gives you an additional ricochet, and this is what's going to allow you to clear a lot of different enemies, or rooms full of different enemies very quickly. I also have the Wombo combo. This is going to be our main bossing weapon. For bossing, you could use any weapon that has a large magazine and a high fire rate, but I find that the Wombo combo just kills everything super fast. Now this also has a second purpose, and that is for dealing with problematic enemies while mobbing. So the Wombo combo's underbarrel rip rockets, they do get the damage bonus from neutron capture, however they do not deal radiation damage, they deal kinetic damage. If you ever run into an elemental eater enemy as Harlowe, it is basically impossible to kill them because everything you do is elemental damage. So by buffing these kinetic damage rockets, you will actually be able to kill those elemental eater enemies. Another way to kill them is by using the Oscar Mike Space Laser, or a Dullahan Spread Launcher, or any spread launcher for that matter. The Spread Launcher is also great for dealing with vile enemies. It will either break all the crystals on their back and kill them outright, or just break all their crystals and then you can just kill them normally. All three of these weapons are also good weapons as fight for your life weapons. If you ever get downed while playing Harlowe and you don't have neutron capture, you're basically a drooling child waiting to get molested because you do 0 damage. So all three of these guns, the Space Laser, the Wombo combo, all of them deal good damage for getting yourself back up. And the Wombo combo specifically doesn't even need the neutron capture buff to do a decent amount of damage. So it is a good fight for your life weapon. For your rep kit, I recommend a Kill Spring. The roll that you get on it doesn't really matter. You can use tank or movement or fleet for some extra movement speed. You could also even use elemental affinity or the splash for some bonus damage, although I really don't think it's necessary. You don't have any other form of survivability with any of your other gear pieces or your skill tree or your specializations, so this is pretty much the only thing that's going to give you survivability, so I went with a tank roll. But honestly, the healing from the overkill that you get is enough to give you perma overshields, and those overshields are great because it's going to allow you to benefit from the shock damage that What's for Dinner provides, as well as the damage from Creative Overflow, since this gives you gun damage bonuses when you have Overshield. Your ordnance doesn't really matter. You can use a Slippy or any other grenade that might have high status chance. The Slippy is good for proccing fire rate if you do prefer that specialization, but otherwise having a grenade with high status chance allows you to have it as backup in case you're not able to get your action skill back from the cooldown from Skeptic class mod. Speaking of which, Skeptic is going to be the recommended class mod. The rolls that you can get on this, I would recommend getting as many points into Bright Future as you can, since this is going to give you increased fire rate. And for the stat, you can get damage dealt, you can get action skill crit hit chance, you can get action skill damage or skill damage. For your shield, I recommend using a What's for Dinner with at least one siphon roll. For mobbing, this is more than enough. For bossing, it might be a little bit inconsistent in getting this to proc. But in general, I like having either a Vagabond roll or a Fleet roll, which gives you move speed whenever you damage enemies. That would be my preferred roll. Don't have one, so Vagabond is just fine. But for bossing, you can also use a Protean Cell. This is going to give you a much bigger shock damage bonus, but you do have to proc this. I really find this bonus damage unnecessary, but that is technically a higher ceiling damage. And it doesn't require RNG from Overshield in the case of Siphon. Like I mentioned earlier, your enhancement would be a Jacob's enhancement, preferably a Quintain because it gives you +1 ricochet as well as a 20% crit chance. For the rolls on it, you want fire rate and magazine size. If you're going to be using the Lucian's flank, you would be good with this, but if you're going to be using the Mad Lad, obviously you can't use the Jacob's enhancement with that. It's not going to benefit you at all. I would recommend using a COV Glacier enhancement. This is going to give you 20% more gun damage when you're below 50% heat, and it's also going to give you a 25% chance to not consume any heat when you shoot. So that's going to equate to a lot more damage, especially when you're shooting in short bursts. And it's also going to allow you to hold down the trigger for longer for bosses without, going into overheating. However, if you're going to be bossing exclusively, I recommend you use a Vladoff enhancement instead, preferably a Hero of Bullet. This is the one that gives you 20% fire rate and magazine size. And it also gives you a 30% chance to add an extra projectile per shot. So that is a huge DPS increase because that is another instance of neutron capture that we're able to proc. And lastly, for your enhancements, I recommend going with 3 Trick Shot. Now, for mobbing, this is going to give you a 50% chance for your crits to refill 1 ammo in the magazine, and combine that with the Lucian's Flank innate talent to refill up to 2 ammo per critical hit. You're going to be constantly refilling your gun. Now, both these effects don't really seem to work super well, mainly because your fire rate is so high and the Lucian's Flank buff does have like an internal cooldown, and Trick Shot is only a 50% chance. But they still enable you to have a much longer time firing before you have to reload. Reloading on Harlowe really sucks. So that is why I opt for Trick Shot and reload speed. Your other 2 points can go into Action Fist. Is going to give you 30% increased action skill damage, which is really strong for us. Now, I'm going to show you guys a clip of me killing a boss with this mobbing setup, and you're going to see how quickly it dies. You truly do not need to change anything in this setup, and you can do every single piece of content in the game right now. However, if you truly wanted to min-max for boss farming, then you could do these different changes. You could swap out the rep kit for a war paint, which is going to give you 30% fire rate. You would opt for either an enrage, a splash damage, or an elemental affinity roll. You would swap your class mod for either a reactor or a driver class mod. And then you would go for the Vladoff weapon enhancement. And all 3 of these pieces would have bullets to spare instead of Trick Shot. This is going to give you a huge fire rate increase. It's going to give you a small magazine size increase that's going to play into the rate of fire buff from the 3-piece bonus set. And that's pretty much it. Now let's quickly go over Rafa, and this is mainly an overdrive build, so we're trying to pick up as many overdrive bonuses as we can. Now, for the first 5 points in the blue tree, we're going to go with Rinse. This is going to give you 20% reload speed. We're mainly going to be using the Hot Slugger for mobbing, so this is going to give us nice quality of life. Now, the 5 points to move down the tree can literally go wherever you want. You could put 1 point into each of these skills if you wanted to for some reason, because literally none of them really benefit us. The only one that I could see having any kind of benefit would be Pa Dentro, which will give you a little bit of health regeneration for the first 7 seconds whenever you activate an action skill. Unfortunately, reactivating an action skill does not seem to proc this, otherwise it would be great for sustain and survivability, but it does not. So moving on down the tree, you have First Impression and Al Centro. Now, you at least need 1 point into this because we were going to have points into Temerario. Now, you do not need to max this because this will continue to give you gun handling per second as overdrive goes on. So it's going to eventually completely overpower and give you even more gun handling than the debuff that Temerario gives you. So you don't really need to put more than 1 point into this. For bosses, your action skill is not going to be active long enough for you to, suffer the negative gun handling for a very long time. So you can split these points however you want. This would be my preferred and my recommendation. I would just put at least 1 point. Moving down, we want to put 5 points into Brain Dump for the crit chance, 5 points into El Soldado for the gun damage, and then 5 points into Hake. Then moving on to the red tree, we're going to put 5 points into Shield Barriest and 2 points into Sia, and this is pretty much the only survivability that we're going to be able to fit into the build. So you have a little bit of shield restoration, and you have a bunch of shield recharge rate and delay. So this is going to be the main way that you stay alive. Other than that, we're going to put 5 points into Juerga, and we're also going to pick up Instinto for action skill sustain so that it lasts a lot longer. And then 3 points into El Valiente to move down the tree, and with your final 4 points you can put them into Vitriol. This is going to give you a bonus instance of corrosive damage on your first shot, and this actually scales off of skill damage. Now, because that scales off of skill damage, you are going to want to put a point into I Am a Gun. I also have the best defense, and riddle you this. This is one of the only characters that can reliably stack this up while bossing. This is mainly a mobbing tool, because for bosses, if you're going for one-shots, you don't really have the opportunity to stack this up. Harlowe would be the only other one that could if you wanted to, but it's unnecessary on her, so you don't even go for it at that point. But he can actually stack this up with his Peacebreaker cannons before going for a one-shot very easily. Now, for one-shots on bosses, but you can consistently do it within the zone. However, this node is going to be into now with caffeine when you are mobbing. As for your gear, we're going to be using the Hot Slugger for our mobbing. This comes as a no-brainer. And the rest of your weapons are spread launchers. So these spread launchers are mainly for bossing, as well as badass enemies and drill site bosses. There will be times where, you know, like the birds or the one in the desert, I forgot the name of, Pango, that there's going to be 2 bosses or multiple bosses. So having more of these means that you can one-shot them each. We're going to be using a triple bypass with Amp, and the triple bypass is great not only because you can use it after your action skill goes down to, you know, pull it back up, but you can also press it 3 times. So for example, if there's a drill site with multiple bosses, you can press one, shoot, press another one, shoot, press another one, shoot. There's also going to be bosses like the Timekeeper and Vile Lictor who have multiple phases, so having multiple procs of this is also useful. But for bosses specifically, we're going to be using an Order purple kit, because this one we can slot it with 2 perks. You can either have Overshield or you can have Enrage, and they both work fine. For your grenade, we're not using the crit knife because we have really high crit chance already from our skill tree. However, I am still using a Jacob's knife because it has damage and payload. This is going to increase the damage taken by any boss by 15%, which is nice. Now, there's really no other grenade options for you to use on this build, so just having this, it's not necessary, but it's nice to have, right? For your class mod, you're going to want a Dancer class mod with at least 1 point into Soltado. Now, your shield for bossing is going to be an Amp shield. A What's for Dinner would be best in slot, but for mobbing, you could honestly use a Fireworks. You do not need the Amp damage from the What's for Dinner or the Overshield damage for mobbing. Okay, this thing is going to clear rooms way faster. And then finally, for your enhancement, you're going to want a multi-strike, a 40% crit damage buff when it's fully stacked, as well as 20% crit chance on your weapons, which we're only using Jacob's weapons, so this is pretty much just 20% crit chance. You can actually stack this up with your Peacebreaker cannons. They actually do stack it up for you. For your firmware, you're going to want 3 pieces of Deadeye. This is going to give you 100% extra critical hit damage. You're going to get 25% from the 2-piece, and then 75% when the 3-piece is fully stacked. Your other 2, I have Heating Up for 20% increased reload speed, which is, again, really nice for the Slugger, and 1-piece High Caliber. However, I also would recommend you having God Killer on your purple rep kits, because this is going to give you a huge damage buff to badass enemies and bosses. So if you wanted to run around with this, that would be my recommendation. Now let's go over Amon, which is my personal favorite. We're first going to pick up What Burns Within, then we're going to pick up Wield the Storm. This is going to, again, increase the damage of our dots and increase their duration. And we're also going to pick up Tritanium Knuckles. This is going to increase the damage of those dots from Raging Inferno, as well as our action skill. So that is really nice. And then here we're going to pick up Into the Fray. We're going to be very close to enemies all the time because this is a melee shotgun hybrid, so you are going to benefit from both the damage reduction as well as the universal damage dealt. We're also going to pick up Force of Nature, and you're only really ever going to pop your action skill to fight bosses, so this is the only time that you would use this. You could use Pyroclast for mobbing, and you can literally AFK, like you just walk into enemies and they collapse, but it's completely unnecessary because all you need for mobbing are these two skills right here. It's Berserk and See in Red, and there is only red. We're then going to put 5 points into Dragon's Breath, and this in combination with Raging Inferno is what's going to give us those insane one-shots. So if they don't die to this proc on your spread launcher from the huge damage, they're going to die from the dot that ensues from it. If they do not die from that dot, they will just die to your Force of Nature Forge skill. If they somehow do not die from your Forge skill, then they will die from your Onslaughter Punch that has Groundbreaker on it, which has stored all the damage you've previously done and unleashes it in that moment. So this is a pretty foolproof, incredibly consistent way of one-shotting bosses. We're also going to put 5 points into Catastrophe, mainly for the critical hit damage, because we are going to be using the crit knife, so our crit rate is going to be locked at 30%, but having these extra crit damage that can affect Inferno and double dip on all of these procs is really strong. And then 1 point into Electrical Fire for that functionality that allows us to have these buffs more consistently. You're also going to grab Stormcutter. With your last 10 points, you can put these here. This is going to give you even more crit damage, and this is going to give you reload speed. Again, just a little quality of life upgrade since we're mainly going to be using the Slugger for mobbing. The gear looks pretty similar. We're going to be using the same setup as Rafa. We're going to use the Hot Slugger for mobbing, and then Dullahands for bossing and pretty much everything else. For your rep kit though, I am going to recommend the Kill Spring. This is going to give you all the sustain that you need to stay alive, and you can also run almost any effect on this. I have Enrage because I mainly only use this when I'm doing drill sites, but the rest of the time you have literally no reason to press this button. Like I said earlier, we're going to be using the crit knife. This is going to give you 30% crit chance. It's not a lot, but you know, it's good enough. There are really no other better options except maybe a Slippy, but that's for like Groundbreaker stacking and things like that, and we're not really focused on melee. This is not a melee build. It is a build that utilizes melee, but it's not a melee-centric build, so it doesn't really benefit you as much, and also you can kill yourself with it, and I've killed myself with Fish Slaps in Borderlands 3 more times than I can count, and I don't want to use fucking Slippy. For your class mod, you're going to want a Raging Furnace with points into either Dragon's Breath or Raging Inferno. For your shield, we're going to be using an Amp What's for Dinner. Now, for your enhancement, I'm going to recommend a Lady Killer Jacobs enhancement. This is going to give you a 20% chance to crit and a 40% chance to ricochet a non-crit. You get a guaranteed ricochet when you do land a crit. So this essentially is going to give you a 60% body shot ricochet chance, which is really nice for ad clear. For bossing, there really isn't a whole lot you can get. The crit rate isn't really needed since we will have the crit knife 30%. You don't really have a way to stack up Sequencer, which gives you the 40% extra critical hit damage. So there's really not a whole lot you can get from your class mod for bossing, so only need one for Amon. Speaking of bossing, for bossing I do not use the Kill Spring. I use a Purple Order rep kit that has Amp and Overshield. You could also use one that has Amp and Enrage, however I found that Overshield plus the What's for Dinner is a little bit more damage than Enrage. I also recommend slotting in Godkiller, so that way for your firmware when you're bossing, you'll have 2 Deadeye. Like I said, you don't really have a way to pre-stack this, so the 3rd level doesn't really matter, but having the 25% increase gun critical damage is nice for our Dullahan spread launcher. You'll also have 2 points into Action Fist for the 30% increase action skill damage, and then the 1 point into Godkiller for that nice 10% damage dealt to badasses, and which includes bosses. For your specializations, I used the Best Defense, I Am a Gun, a Hone Mind, and Groundbreaker. A lot of the times, if you shoot a mob and they do not die to the Hot Slugger hit, you can just slap them and they will probably explode. Now let's finally go over my original main, which is Vex. Now Vex is probably the most Maroon 5 build in this entire game. So starting off with our green tree, we're going to put 5 into Leeching Attunement, Bloodletter, and Material Components. Then you're going to pick up Ars Arcana for the increased skill damage. Now the reason I'm doing this is because your bleed is actually considered skill damage. We're also going to grant Essence Leech for even more lifesteal, and then finally Blood is Power. Now Blood is Power gives you this bonus kinetic damage with guns based off your lifesteal whenever your health is full. So maintaining your health full at all times is a big priority. Moving on, we're going to put 3 points into Idle Hands for a 30% increase to your reload speed. Again, we're going to be using the same guns, which is a slugger, so this is just for quality of life purposes. Also put 2 points into Cold Iron just for a little bit of gun damage to move down the tree, and pick up Portents of Suffering. This is going to increase your status effect damage by 35%, which is really nice. And then finally, you have 3 leftover points, which I put into Grave Fiends. You could put these points anywhere that you want to. The only points I recommend you do pick up is 3 points into Hasty Fiends for the damage reduction and 15% just base move speed, as well as enchantment. Now for mobbing, you will literally never have to use your action skill, which is great for me because I hate the animation of Vex's action skill. But if you do want to use it, if you like the little ball tickling animation that she has when she has it active, I highly recommend not equipping the Heart Piercer capstone. And this is because whenever you cast this is going to chunk your health by 20%. And like I said, you need to be at 100% health in order to benefit from this, which is a huge damage buff. So using this is going to actively reduce your overall damage output. So please do not use Heart Piercer. If you are going to be mobbing, you can use Grave Harvest. Like I said, you don't need to use your action skill ever unless you're fighting a boss. And I don't mean a drill site boss. I mean a real actual boss. You have so much damage that you do not need to pop this ever. So you don't need to equip this. If you like I said, like the ball tickling animation, go ahead and use it. Otherwise, you can use Witchy Triggerfinger for a little bit of extra gun damage. Now, for your gear, you're going to be using mainly a Hot Slugger for all of your mobbing, and then a Dullahan for all of your bossing. Now, for drill sites and smaller, weaker enemies, you honestly don't even need to use Dullahans like drill site bosses. If you just use an Amp Hot Slugger, if you land a bleed, that's pretty much going to kill absolutely anything. Now for your rep kit, I recommend using a Kill Spring. Like, I'm not going to be using a Teen Witch class mod, so this is going to be your sustain. This is going to allow you to stay at full health and also grant you overshield so you can make use of your What's for Dinner shock damage. However, the What's for Dinner is not really needed for mobbing. You could just use a Firework shield as well, but like I said, the less item swapping, the better, right? Now, I am also using a crit knife on Vex. Honestly, it's all you need. You don't really need a crazy amount of crit rate. For your class mod, you're going to be using a Scion class mod. Try to get as many points into Bloodletter as possible. For your shield, you can use a What's for Dinner, and for mobbing, you can also use a Firework shield. And for your class enhancement, or sorry, your weapons enhancement, you're going to want a Lady Killer class mod. Once again, this is going to give you a 40% chance to ricochet on non-crits. And for your firmware, you're going to want 3 Deadeye, 1 Heating Up for the reload speed, and then 1 High Caliber. This is just for quality of life, since you're mainly going to be using the Hot Slugger. But for your bossing rep kit, I once again recommend just put on God Killer instead, so that way you have this extra damage. For your specializations, I use the best defense, riddle you this, contamination for those bleed procs, as well as I am a gun, because this is going to increase the damage of your bleeds based on your gun damage, and you have a lot, so this is really, really strong. And that's it, guys. If you have any questions or concerns or recommendations or suggestions, I'd love to hear them in the comments. The link to my Discord is in the description of every single one of my videos, so join the Discord. If you guys are on console, or if you're having trouble finding any of the items that I've shown in this video, I'd be happy to drop you a copy. Just hit me up on my Discord server like I mentioned, and I can, add you on Shift and give you a copy of the gear. Anyways, that'll be it for now. I'll see you guys in 6 months for a updated version of this video. Take care.